Hello and welcome to this edition of Behind the Screens with me, David Hart, and Mark McDermott.
Hello and hello world.
We're trying something new this time. Hopefully,
we're trying lots of things new. Firstly, we're trying to do a podcast.
Yeah, we haven't done one for a while. We're gonna. That's going to change this year. We're going to be much more consistent with it. And also, clearly, we're videoing it, which I don't know.
Am I just supposed to ignore the camera? Like, as I go, do I look at it, go, hello world? Yeah, right, just ignore it. Right.
Maybe we should talk to each other. Maybe that's the way it should go.
I mean, do you think that the quality of our podcast will rise because our production values have suddenly increased to such a Joe Rogan-esque level?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Will this get us the millionth subscriber, or maybe even just the 100th?
Just push it over just slightly nudge it over the wall.
Cool.
So, what we're going to talk about this episode comes back to it's a part to do with our company and how we are, I guess, trusting of staff. So we kind of lead with our natural default is to trust staff rather than to apply lots and lots of rules. And the reason that I thought was quite interesting because it was actually at a Christmas party. I was talking to someone who just joined the business, and she was talking about her previous business and about how difficult it was that the boss would very much be clock watching the whole time, and you're not at your desk and you've taken too long a lunch break. And there was one point she needed to go back to where she came from, her home town, which was outside of the country, and she needed to get there for various reasons. And she wasn't allowed to go, and it just felt like what she was telling me was describing someone who was quite a kind of controlling bully. And she said, look, which is obviously horrible, but she was saying, but I don't understand it. Like, why do you trust your staff? Or how do you trust your staff? For example, we have at the moment at least, an unlimited holiday policy, but also we're quite cool for people to work from home. We're not sort of sat.
Or overseas.
We're not sort of sat we're not sort of there at 9:30 going, what time do you call this kind of thing? There's none of that happens. And I kind of thought about it, and I probably just said, well, we're
just nice guys.
Yeah, I said, look, as far as I'm concerned, we hire grown-ups. I've said this a few times in interviews. We're hiring grown-ups, and we expect people, I think genuinely people do a job, not because they get paid. Obviously that's a fundamental reason why we all come to work. But if that was all you were worried about, you'd probably get a job working in a bank or something, or I think people come to work generally because they want to do a good job. And nobody likes going home at the end of the week and go, God, I did a really bad job, but at least I didn't have to work hard. I don't actually believe that's what motivates people. So I think, as long as you hire people who are bright and want to do a good job, then that was my reaction. But when I thought about it some more, and I think there's probably more to it than just going, people are good and people are smart and we should trust them. I think it's a sort of a little bit more fundamental than that. And I know you've been talking a lot about this recently because you've been doing a lot of interviewing for people.
Well, I mean, there is a ton to unpack just around that. And I'm recruiting for a head of people, and I've been interviewing all week. So I've been talking to very experienced HR professionals who are more, leaning towards how you create fantastic culture, how you scale that culture, and how you give people the right opportunities, career development plans. So it's a people-oriented role rather than like how do we go and recruit loads of people. So that's just the first thing, and obviously inevitably in those conversations, company culture, protecting company culture, and enhancing company culture become kind of fundamental part of what you're really talking about. Now, really everything else beyond that is tactics. Now, I think there's just so many things to think about. My brain floods, but actually, I think first of all, it starts with a real basic fundamental, which is kind of how you've alluded to. Do you fundamentally think people are good or bad? Because if you think that most people come to work to try and take away as much money as they can and do as little as they can, then you have a personal problem with people, and you probably shouldn't be a people leader.
And I also think that's probably rooted in like almost like an industrial age of, if you come to work and you have to work down a pit, you probably do want to be down the pit for as little time as possible and get paid as much for doing it.
But the world has clearly moved on from that. I mean, there's so work is now an integral part of people's life, and they see work as not something they have to put up with just so they can go and enjoy the rest of the time, but actually they've waken up to the fact that work is the majority of your adult waking hours, and therefore plays a fundamental role in your happiness, and in where your life goes, and in what you learn, and the people you know, and all of these things. So I think, obviously, strange, it seems so bloody obvious, but it only seems to be a recent phenomenon that there's there. And then I think ultimately then, it obviously, like all of these things in culture, it comes from leadership down. Because you can say whatever the hell you like on your website and on your values and write it on a wall in big paint or whatever.
People are our greatest assets.
Yeah, exactly. From some kind of evil corporate bank. And it's like, bollocks. Your algorithm's your greatest asset. Your programmatic way of ripping people off is... No, anyway. But it comes from that. It comes from that. And if you put an employee handbook of effectively rules, which just tries to cut people off at every opportunity they might otherwise have to rip you off, you're effectively not incentivizing, but you're leading people towards, like it's like taxation, right? The taxation book of rules is there so that to try and make accountants not work around it, but it sort of incentivizes the accountants to try and find loopholes because it's so thorough and so deep. It's like, well, how can I get around this system? But what if you just say, we think people should pay tax because, that's the good thing for society. But there's no real rules about that. You should just do it. Now, I'm not suggesting that. I'm not like Bernie Sanders on speed. But fundamentally, what you're basically saying is, do you agree that it's right that you come to work and try and contribute? And we don't want to put a ridiculous framework around trying to gamify or force you into that by insisting what hour you sit at the desk and what hour you leave, and watching your keystrokes, or limiting your internet access, or whether you can go home because you need the plumber to come, or whatever it might be. If we just strip all that shit away, and just say, hi, I like you, I believe in you, I think you're really talented, and we've got some stuff that we need help on to make our company move forward and get us closer to our mission. Well, if you'd like to come and be part of that, we're not going to sort of, because we've already believed in you, we're going to prove that by then not creating this ridiculous framework around you, which sort of locks you in.
One of the things I wrote a sort of piece about this, is that, as any company nowadays, you end up outsourcing a lot of what you do.
True.
Your accounts, probably, you use an accountant, use a lawyer, you might use a marketing agency. And those people are really critical to your business, and they cost a lot of money. But you wouldn't dream of phoning your lawyer up at 9 o'clock in the morning and then berating him or her because they weren't actually there at their desk. No,
but I suppose that comes back to that kind of commercial accountability going back centuries, which is, if they don't do it, they won't get paid. But that isn't the same with employees. And it's not the same with employees. You are legally obliged to pay your employees.
However, at the same time, you trust that they'll do the job that you're paying them to do.
True.
And it's the same thing with employees. I think it's a sort of similar kind of thing. You go, look, I don't kind of care how you do it. Well, I do, as long as, to an extent, but I trust it, because I also don't actually believe that you have this thing where at 9:30 or whatever time you officially start, you're suddenly productive. Well, and then you're not productive for an hour over lunch, and then you're productive again until 5:30.
That's like, no, humans don't operate that way. We never have. In fact, we would look how the fact that we're even sat here talking today as human beings is because that's not how we operated. We have to work around the situation that we're in when it comes to, that's why you can survive as long as you can without food, because food was scarce. And so you have fat stores so that you can, people have evolved not to work into perfectly predictable slots. I think it's quite, even sleeping in one block is seen as not really actually the ideal way of doing it. It's just, I suppose there was a point in history where we had to kind of organize ourselves into some sort of productive manner. And then we've now pushed beyond that again, which is sort of a closer reality to probably what it was right back at the beginning, which is you can be as productive at home in a few hours or by just doing things more intelligently than actually just chucking a ton of hours at it. Ultimately, the contract of employment is not, please do this for a certain number of hours. The contract of employment now should be, please help us achieve this. Now, do you really care if that took them 4 hours or 2? In fact, you'd probably prefer it took 2. Not because it would save you money, just because it would just be better.
And obviously, if you're working in a factory and your job is to put something here and put it over there, then clearly it makes sense, and your productivity will be directly related to the amount of time that you're sat at the conveyor belt. But for the people that we hire, that's just ridiculous. And also, having said that, someone might say, well, you're lucky, you just haven't been burnt. But actually, we not in
have been
ScreenCloud, but in our previous life,
Yeah.
talking about trusting people, and we had one person that stole about £60,000, which is what, $75,000-$80,000 from us.
During a recession.
During a session.
Whilst we were having to let really good people go.
And we also, it coincided with our agency's 5th birthday party.
Up, wasn't it?
And she was one of the people that we flew to Nice. As part. There's loads of things you just think,
it still burns.
It still burns. So we extended you. So you could imagine that we might be really cynical now and go, look, we tried that and we got really badly burnt. But I think fundamentally we know that, you're always going to get someone who takes the piss, probably.
In fact, the fact that in all of the years that we've worked together and employed people, the fact is, I really, as far as we know, and I'm pretty sure we know, only happened like once. And maybe some other people have maybe taken some of that trust generosity too far. That's probably more likely than just straight up theft. But in a weird way, it sort of proves why you don't need to worry about it as much. The fact that if you put it as a percentage, I mean, we must have in all the years employed well over 200 people, maybe more, 200-300 people.
Maybe, yeah.
So it's less than 1%, much less. And maybe it sort of proves the point. But that's maybe no different to other things which happen to you in life, which is, like let's say your kid breaks their arm playing in the garden. What, you're going to ban them from playing unless they're supervised or just covered in cotton wool? Or you get your heart broken, suddenly all men or women are shit because I'm just going to get it hurts, you recover, but you still maintain a fundamental belief that isn't the status quo.
Yeah.
And yet almost no business. And trust me, out of these interviews, I mean, I'm not going to talk about it, certainly on camera or podcast or whatever, but I've heard some bloody horror stories of how people behave towards their team. I mean, it's.
Is this employees or employer?
No. Like in every interview, we've obviously talked about, like in HR, that quite a lot of the role of HR is to have the tough conversations, to do the difficult things, to move people along who you might actually like. I mean, we've had to do that. That there's no personal reason, but it just isn't working, and it's probably best for both. All of that I think is part of day-to-day practice. Not everything works out, right? Not everyone's going to be your friend forever. This is more this kind of, well, I suppose the terminology I used earlier when I was telling you about it was dysfunctional narcissism. And I do think, there is something about being a kind of an owner or a starter of a company, an entrepreneur, for whatever better word, that you do have to be a little bit odd in some ways. Not necessarily in a bad way, but clearly that some of those people also have kind of quite dysfunctional, nasty characters. And and we're hearing this coming from this is all of the horror stories that have been coming out of Uber and to a degree like kind of Google and Facebook and this has kind of surfaced in the last couple of years of just how, one, it's been brushed under the carpet, and two, it's kind of just been accepted. Okay, that's kind of veering off topic slightly, but actually it really comes back to the character of the person at the top influencing the culture of how that company is going to perform.
So you could almost argue that if, this is perhaps not 100% true, but if you have a problem with staff not abiding by the rules in the broader sense of term, then you probably have to look to the leadership rather than to the staff.
Totally. Yeah. If your staff aren't bought in and you think that creating yet more rules is going to achieve that, then you are missing the bloody point. Like, if your staff aren't bought in, it's because you've not got them bought in. It's because you haven't, and not because it's some kind of trickery, because authenticity is quite hard to fake. Integrity is reasonably hard to fake over a long period of time. Probably in an hour, podcast, maybe you can sort of fake it if you really tried, but maybe not over 10. So if you listen to a consistent theme, I think you'll get to know who we really are. If people aren't, when we had this, I think we can probably say it now, it's gone bust, with Tepelo. Remember when we went to Tepelo, it was one of our previous businesses. We got kind of semi-forcibly bought out. Probably in hindsight was actually a good thing.
Best thing that could happen,
and then we kind of still maintained some tiny shareholding, and we went in and we liked the team. We went in and we talked to the CEO, who wasn't a founder. He was kind of CEO that the investors sort of, they didn't put in. And he was a really good guy, like a CEO. He's good. But when we talked about mission and values, he talked about targets. And then we wondered why there was high turnover, or why people were kind of so bonus oriented in why they would come to work. And if they didn't get their bonus, they would leave. It was like, well, if your mission is a financial target, then everything you're looking at, everything you're aiming for, has some kind of currency symbol in front of it. But if your mission is to try and, like in our case, kind of like to help businesses communicate better across the world, yeah, well, there is actually a financial target after that, but it's not the primary driver. And therefore, the people who are kind of bought into our mission and vision, they're not thinking money first. They're thinking, how can we get closer to actually achieving that in a meaningful way?
Yeah.
And therefore, your culture will be different just from that one thing alone.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. Again, sort of veering slightly, but you could just having slightly different ways of measuring people or seeing whether or checking whether you think someone's doing a good job can have a huge impact on behavior, and just the way
treat people like children, they become children.
Yeah, exactly.
You can infantilize them. Is that it? Infantilize them? Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
It's not killing children.
Yeah, that's infanticide. Yeah,
we don't want to do that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. But yeah, exactly there. If you say to, I mean, I can remember. It's been a while since I've worked for someone, but I do remember that feeling of your boss kind of overstepping the mark in terms of, and just feeling like you feel like an idiot, and you also just kind of feel embarrassed almost for yourself, but also for them. And you're like, really? Have you really just said that? You've really just.
Maybe so. So I've kind of attacked people on the kind of narcissistic way, but maybe there's a more somewhere where we could be kinder to the people. Maybe it's to do with insecurity at leadership, because a bit of imposter syndrome, especially as a leader who's never really done it before. You could be constantly thinking, oh my God, like, am I doing this right? Why do they believe in me? Why do those people believe in me? And it could be your own insecurity, which is causing you to then be so paranoid about it. It's not that you just really kind of want to be a bully and an arse. It's actually maybe more of the result's the same. That's a slightly nicer way. I probably like that person more than I would, the kind of the bully. I mean, there's that thing on Twitter, he's all going around, that guy who had this ridiculous interview technique where he effectively tried to just torch this poor woman, kind of early in her career, and just like call her an underachiever. And it's all gone on Twitter, like, and then she got the job. But it was obviously some kind of test, because he obviously thought, well, it's a tough old world. Only the fittest survive. So let's put her through the equivalent of Navy SEALs training for copywriters, and see if she's still talking to me at the end. But the thing is, she didn't sign up for Navy SEALs training, did she? She went for a job. Yeah. And now that guy looks like a right.
Yeah, it's to an extent. When we were raising funding at some point, you had sometimes people were really aggressive, and you just think, well, actually, I don't really want to work with you. God, yeah. Whatever you say, whatever you come back with now, I just kind of think, well, I've seen your true colours. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Or maybe it wasn't.
Even if they went, oh, don't worry, it was just a test. I'm like, no, it wasn't.
You're an idiot.
You can't. Again, as I said, it's kind of hard to fake that sustainably. It's like, oh no, not really. That was just me, the act. I mean, as I said, actually, we were talking about that thing that's been going around in one of the interviews yesterday, and. It's like the only case that could ever be remotely acceptable is if it's some kind of like acting, you're sort of, call them when you're
improvisation.
An audition of some kind of like, I'm going to pretend to be the world's nastiest fucker, and you're going to see how you respond to that.
Do you remember? I was thinking of the Office with David Brent when he did that. Do you remember? He just went, "There's a rape up there." Do you remember?
I mean, another thing. This is definitely on track. The other thing is also
got a serious point in a sec.
Oh, right, I was just going to add one other thing, which is maybe even just a little bit of an aside. I mean, if you can get yourself in an emotionally balanced state enough to actually trust people, there's a really beautiful byproduct. You have to do less work. It's actually, it's spying on a lot of people.
Oh yeah,
it's like a lot of effort.
Yeah,
you've got to do it well. I mean, you may as well go for it. Do it well. Don't just track the data for no reason. May as well actually kind of search through it and try and see if you can find the conspiracy.
Yeah,
that's hours and hours and emotional, like the emotional cost of like assuming everyone's out to get you and then looking for it. This is a high stress scenario.
Because to be honest, I expect that people do, and this probably comes on to my next point. I expect people do say unkind things about me and you.
Of course they do.
And I kind of don't care that much, because I just kind of think, I mean, I don't want people to dislike me.
Being okay with being disliked or mildly.
Mildly disliked.
But I would say it was probably a love. I would go as far as say it's probably
not necessarily disliked,
a respectful or even kind of
criticised.
Loving's a bit much. But more like, no, I think so. I mean, you mock, like you take the piss out of your friends, right?
Yeah.
To a degree, it's a sign of affection. It's a sort of bizarre human way that we do that. We kind of tend to sort of play a bit like.
But I almost think like if you're a leader, you're gonna screw up, and you're not going to necessarily give people the amount of attention that they necessarily think you should do.
Yeah, exactly.
But I guess my other sort of point around this then was, is there a danger that because you want to be liked, that you kind of almost go the other way? So you'll kind of go, you know what? I'm your mate, I'm your best mate, and you can trust me, and I'm going to trust you, and hey, whatever's...
It's like the Liberal Democrats in the thick of it. Don't want to offend anyone.
Yeah, exactly. Because like the danger, I guess, is if you're saying, look, we totally trust you, what happens
Everything you ever do is amazing.
Yeah.
Just so good.
What happens when you do turn
Carry
around
on sleeping.
and say, you know what, how do you do that? So, I mean, we had to let someone go at the end of last year, and I'm not sure whether he expected that or not. I don't know. Maybe he did. But he could have said, I'm really confused because you're really nice to me all the time, and now you're saying I've got to go. He didn't say that instantly, but...
I know what you mean. I know what you're getting at. Obviously, it's difficult, isn't it? I mean, I think, well, you're a parent. I'm not. But it's a bit like, I mean, you're nice. You're 90% of the time, you and your kids have a nice, fun time. You play silly games, jokes, like whatever fun looks like, you have that. And then when they step out of line, you switch in and go, all right, well, if you need to, I'm going to have to be that. And then, but they know.
Well, if you ask my wife, she said, you never do that. You always leave that to me to do. But yeah, I get your point.
Okay, well, there you go. Maybe there's some lessons here. But, you'll switch in. They know as well as you do that you have to perform that role. And in fact, they'd probably be disappointed if you didn't. Because, well, maybe to some degree, maybe when they're a bit older, obviously, and more mature. But, like, good parenting isn't just having your kids like you constantly. That's actually bad. You're gonna create a little monster, aren't you?
Yeah.
If you do that. So I don't think it's much different from that. It's like you can be both, and and also it's like it's not like when you flip into anger or discipline mode that you can't then flip back out. I mean, otherwise you're just stuck there. Like well,
I think you're
gremlin.
You're very good at this. You're very good at like you're friendly, but you all. Like I think everyone would know that there's a line. And in some ways I don't want to kind of relate it back to kids because it sounds like we're it's the whole infanticide.
Yeah, exactly. Being guilty of exactly what I said we wouldn't do.
But there's I think like if you're quite good at. I don't think I've never seen you kind of pull someone out individually, but you would kind of make anyone kind of listening to some of your concerns, let's say, would go, okay, I'm guilty of that. Probably it doesn't need to be said, but maybe that's But then you and I have both worked places where someone would very publicly give someone a dressing down, and that would be awkward for everybody.
I think that. I mean, there's probably like reams and reams of books and theory on kind of people management style. As I say, like I don't think. I mean. I always go back to a bit of sport, but like Alex Ferguson's theory was that you kind of berate privately. You may criticize group publicly as a kind of we've all not achieved this, or a section of us have not achieved this. But then you also defend too publicly your team and stuff. I think ultimately, like if you were to sort of talk about people's kind of greatest nightmares in sort of life, well, not great. Okay, there's probably so many of them, but let's take it. Amongst this example, it would probably be like really, really drastic humiliation would probably be fairly high if you take away all of the obvious things like being eaten by a shark or murdered or really ill or losing family members. But take all of those bigger things away. Yeah. If someone was to have a stress dream, it might involve them stood on a stage like just humiliating themselves and feeling like the worst on earth. Right. That's probably a reasonably consistent thing.
Yeah, common theme. Yeah.
So if you're going to pull someone out of a group and individually do that to them, I mean, you're basically making that horror story a reality. Now, is that fair? Is that necessary? I would say not. But if if it's sort of a collective sort of underperformance in some way, So long as people can think, I'm getting the message, but I'm not being singled out, then I think it's more powerful, because now they're thinking less about their own humiliation and more about what they actually need to do to improve it. That would be my thinking there.
So I guess sort of in conclusion then, obviously we've taken the decision, not that we ever really took a decision, I guess we've always sort of been like this, but maybe more so since we started ScreenCloud.
Yeah, I think back in the agency, I think I was probably guilty of it. I used to keep the holiday calendar up to date. They've taken a half day there, and I did do that, and I didn't do it because I was a spy. I think I did that because I thought that's what you do, because that's what we had done in the previous business, and we were just cloning previous practices. And you know what? Guess what? After logging it all that time, no one ever did anything wrong.
Yeah. And even if someone said, "Oh, actually, can I take a few more days?" I mean, you're just like, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to make a huge difference.
Yeah. I mean, and we've had, in the past we had people kind of taking massive amounts of time off, some of it unpaid and some of it paid, and we were just quite. And partly it's because I suppose, if I'm honest, we were scared about losing them. So I'm thinking about the Kane brothers and trips over back to New Zealand. And I suppose what we've done with ScreenCloud has made it less of a kind of exception and more just said, look, let's not get. We've got enough things to worry about. Let's not worry about whether someone has taken an extra half day this year that they, and the thing that I said is always ridiculous, and everyone has experienced this, where you've worked somewhere and you realize you've only got like a day and a half left and it's Christmas, so you have to come in between Christmas and New Year for a day and a half. Nothing happens.
Just you and the security guard.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, great, I've done my duty here, but why? For what purpose? And how does that make me feel about the organisation, really?
But, one of the interesting things to finish. Well, I don't know if it's.
Well, I suppose I was going to say, do to an extent, like, have we adopted this principle because we are scared of losing good people, or is it more of a kind of fundamental, or is it because we want to be liked, or is it just actually we think this is the best practice? And I guess another thing about that is, if we hadn't got the way that we do treat people, if we did treat them differently and made it more of a kind of like, you have to be here from 9 till 5, you're only allowed 20 days holiday a year, and you have to take an hour lunch break, would we have different people working for us? Would some of those people have left by now? Would we be less productive? I mean, it's impossible to tell. But
and that's how we're concluding.
Yeah, but
it's a massive question.
Yeah, but in yours, what's your? I mean, I think I know what the answer is going to be, because otherwise
I would say it's because it feels right. It feels like the modern way. It feels like, I think, to be honest, we couldn't have run an agency this way, even with this philosophy, because, clients want, to your point earlier, clients do want to ring at 9:30 and speak to their account manager. They do want to be confident that if they contact you at this time or that time, that you're available, and you're it's like the kind of almost agreement of how you would work together. So I think because, in effect, we've got customers all over the world. Each industry has 24. It's basically 24/7. Something's going on. So there's always stuff to do. There's always something going on, and therefore, it's almost because of that, you can kind of dip in and out at any time you really wish, and just keep contributing towards the system. There is no such thing as close of play at ScreenCloud, because which date is that even? Which time zone is that? I don't know.
Yeah.
So I think that partially it just seems like the right thing to do for the business model that we have. Is it because we want to be liked? I suppose maybe.
I think part of it might be as well. It's the way we like to work.
Yeah, I was going to say. Yeah, I was like, is it because I think it's just quite pleasant myself.
I know that
you don't want to have one rule for us and one rule for everyone else. I mean, that's just stupid. So
I know personally, I tend to like you do as well. Quite often we'll be online quite early, but that doesn't mean to say we're sat at the desk in London.
No, I'm in bed.
Yeah,
I'm in bed at 7:30 on my phone, or 6:30 even, and going through stuff. And I actually don't mind that. I quite enjoy it.
Yeah, and I think that. So I sort of have a little flurry then, and then, I might go for a run, or I might travel to work, or I might take the kids to school or whatever, and then I'm back in it again. And then quite often, my kind of most productive time is sort of between 4 p.m. and 7 p.m., which again doesn't really fit around your standard 9 to 5 thing. So I think there's an element of that. Yeah.
Really.
I mean, if you think about Luke, he's often,
He's
I mean,
later.
Yeah, you know, you can have conversations with Luke, and it's 2:00 in the morning his time, and that's not unusual for him.
Yeah,
it's not. I
don't
don't
think
think
won't be having a conversation with him at 8 a.m. though.
Yeah, no, and I don't think it's because he feels obliged because of the time difference to kind of log in at that time. I just think that's part of the time when he's most productive. He just, you know, at 2:00 in the morning, he's kind of, you know, he's there and he wants to talk. But yeah, as I said, I think if you wanted to talk to him at 9:00 his time in the morning, you might find it harder to get hold of him.
So here's the interesting challenge. Maybe this is a good end bit if we're supposed to end now, which is, so I've talked about this a hell of a lot this week in all these interviews, and without doubt, every single person, and I don't think it was just blowing smoke because they were in a job interview, although it's possible, thought this was really a good, modern and mature way to treat staff. Where they've all raised a flag and said it will be difficult in future is protecting that as you scale. Because right now we have a direct relationship with every member of the team. Like at least one founder knows every person who works here quite well, reasonably well, and probably interviewed them and works with them and actually collaborates with them. When you 6x that or even 3x that won't be the case. And at that point, that's where to a degree the good reason for having a framework of rules is that it establishes how people should behave when they don't otherwise know how to. And so that doesn't mean you then have to impose loads of rigor and formality, but inevitably that's probably how you end up there because it seems like the right thing to do. Just like we're introducing an expenses policy now. I don't love it because I feel it's a bit tail wag dog, but you know, that's another subject. But there's good reasons for that. But basically it's introducing rules that we didn't previously have.
Yeah.
Now, are they coming in by stealth? Are they coming in because finance thinks that's a good idea? And everyone goes, yes, God, yeah, you should really be on top of your expenses, definitely. Well, actually that erodes our values a little if it's implemented incorrectly. Yeah. And that is the challenge because 3 founders cannot control every single thing. And actually, if we did, there would be completely what we say we don't do. Yeah. So you might find that all these rules will appear that were never, ever ordained by you, me, or Luke. And we go, how did this happen?
Yeah, that's the scary thing. Is like,
that is the scary thing.
It's not exactly rogue, but someone says, well, this is the way I'm going to run my
done
team.
with the best intentions. Yeah. You know, as I said, it's a Trojan horse of shit. You have to then it goes back even more to mission-driven values, because then when the people are making up those things, they have to think twice before they execute them and go, is this in line with our culture? Is this in line with how ScreenCloud does stuff? Yeah. And if they genuinely think that, then fine. And if they think that and it's clearly wrong, then we've taken the wrong person on.
So, ScreenCloud, part behind the screens. Part podcast.
We should revisit this podcast in 1 year and see how good we've done it.
Yeah. So I say it's part podcast, part self-counseling.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Well, I think
to all the narcissists out there, stay dysfunctional. We'll get all your best people.
Awesome. Okay. Until next time. Ciao.
Bye-bye.